Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. Tonight, we'll return to the familiar hills of the Shire, beneath starlit skies and soft green earth, where memories linger like the scent of old books and pipe smoke. This is a story wrapped in warmth and stillness, filled with gentle mystery and the kind of quiet wonder that only Middle-earth can offer. Settle in, perhaps with a cup of tea or a soft blanket, and let your thoughts drift like leaves on a calm river. Whether your day has been long or your heart is simply searching for a place to rest, you've found the right tale to guide you gently towards sleep. Close your eyes if you'd like, or let them rest softly on the darkness around you. Imagine the gentle flicker of firelight in Bag End, the sound of wind brushing through the party tree, and the hush of secret tunnels long hidden beneath the hill. In this quiet corner of the world, Frodo Baggins finds a mystery left behind, an ancient echo of love, loss, and the kind of peace that arrives not in a roar, but in a whisper. And now, that whisper will carry us too, one word at a time, into dreams. Let's begin. The sun had long set behind the rolling hills of the Shire, painting the sky with the soft afterglow of twilight, where stars were beginning to blink into life. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of the party tree, and a chorus of crickets began their nightly song. Bag End stood quietly atop Hobbiton Hill, its round windows aglow with the warm, orange light of hearth and candle. Inside, Frodo Baggins sat curled in Bilbo's old armchair, a thick, leather-bound book balanced on his lap. He wasn't reading anymore, not truly. His eyes hovered over the words without seeing them, while his thoughts drifted, far away and yet curiously near, carried by the quiet rhythm of the wind whispering through the chimney. The room was filled with the scent of pipeweed and lavender from a vase by the window, mingling with the faint musk of old parchment. Around him were Bilbo's belongings, maps with ink-faded lines, trinkets from distant lands, and tales once read aloud under the glow of candlelight when Frodo was still but a boy. These walls had heard much: laughter, riddles, dreams of dragons and elves, and the silence that came after war. Yet that night, as the clock on the mantel ticked ever so slowly, a different sound met Frodo's ears. At first, it was so soft, he thought it was a creak of the wood settling. But then it came again, a hollow tapping, like knuckles on old stone, echoing faintly from beneath the floorboards. Frodo sat upright, book forgotten. He held his breath. The sound was deliberate, rhythmic, and completely out of place in the stillness of Bag End. He turned his head slowly toward the far corner of the room, the study, where Bilbo used to keep his oldest maps and letters. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Frodo's eyes settled on a part of the floor where the wood seemed darker, more worn, though he had never noticed it before. A strange feeling prickled at the back of his neck. Not fear, precisely, but the keen edge of old curiosity, awakened after long sleep. Standing, he set the book gently on the side table and took up a small lantern from its hook. Its golden light flickered as he walked softly across the room, careful not to disturb the silence, as though it were a spell that could break at any sudden movement. He knelt and placed his palm against the floor. It was cold, colder than the rest of the room, and as he leaned closer, he caught the scent of something unfamiliar. Old stone and damp earth, tinged with something older still. He tapped lightly with his knuckles and heard it, a dull echo beneath the planks, as if the earth itself hid a hollow chamber below. His heart began to beat a little faster, not with fear, but with wonder. Bilbo had once spoken of secret doors and hidden passages in the halls of dwarves and ruins of elves, but Frodo had never imagined that one might exist in Bag End. He sat back on his heels, thinking. If there was something hidden here, it would not be found easily. Bilbo had been clever, and secrets were often kept in plain sight. He let his eyes roam across the room, landing finally on the tall bookshelf that lined the wall. The tapping had come from beneath it, or near enough. It was crammed with old volumes, scrolls, and Bilbo's own weathered journal, still wrapped in its green ribbon. Frodo stood again, stepping over quietly and running his fingers along the wood. The shelf was solidly built into the wall, or so it seemed. But when he pressed his hand to the leftmost side, there was a faint give. He stepped back and pushed gently, and to his astonishment, the entire structure shifted. With a groan of old hinges and stone scraping against stone, the back panel of the bookshelf slid aside, revealing a narrow, dark passageway carved into the hill itself. A breath of air, musty and cool, wafted from within. Frodo held up his lantern and peered inside. The tunnel descended steeply into shadow, its walls lined with rough-hewn stone, as though shaped by tools but long ago, and not by hobbit hand. He hesitated for only a moment. There was something about this hidden corridor that felt familiar. Not in memory, but in presence, as if it had been waiting for him. He stepped forward, ducking beneath the low archway, and began to descend. The sound of his footsteps echoed softly, muffled by the earth, and the air grew cooler the farther he went. The flicker of the lantern threw dancing shadows along the stone walls, which were marked here and there with faded carvings. Symbols Frodo did not recognize, but which stirred something in the back of his mind. Perhaps they were elvish, or older still. As he moved deeper into the hill, the silence became more profound. No longer was there the distant sound of the Shire Night above, no wind, no crickets, only the sound of his own breath and the occasional creak of the lantern's handle. He stopped for a moment to rest, leaning against the cool stone. He felt a strange calm settle over him, as if the passage had gently wrapped itself around his thoughts. The burden he had carried since returning from Mordor, the weight of memory, the ache of old wounds, felt for the moment softer, dulled by the deep quiet of the earth. Something stirred in Frodo then, something ancient and rooted not just in his own story, but in the deep history of Middle-earth itself. There was more beneath Bag End than he had ever imagined, more than Bilbo had ever spoken of. This was not merely a hobbit hole. It was something older, a place tied to secrets that perhaps even Thougheyes had left undisturbed. With that thought, Frodo straightened and took another step forward, the lantern light pushing back the dark as he pressed deeper into the unknown. The night above continued quietly, stars wheeling over the Shire, but beneath the hill, the past had begun to stir. The stone passage sloped downward gently, and though the air grew colder, it did not feel hostile. Frodo's feet moved quietly over the rough floor, and the flickering lantern in his hand painted the walls with golden warmth that pushed back the pressing shadows. The silence here was deep, not empty, but waiting, as though the very rocks were listening. The carvings that marked the walls became more frequent the farther he went, and though faded by age, they were unmistakably elvish in design. Slender curves, stars, leaves, and the faint, delicate tracings of Tengwar script. Frodo ran his fingers along one of the etched lines and felt the worn smoothness of the stone. Whoever had come this way before him had passed through long, long ago. The hallway bent to the right, then opened slightly into a small antechamber where the air was thick with dust and time. Frodo paused here, eyes scanning the walls for any sign of what this place once had been. There was a silence in this space that felt reverent, like a breath held for centuries. To his left, half covered in fallen debris and old roots that had crept through cracks in the stone, stood what appeared to be the edge of a wooden frame, a door, or something like one, though it lacked hinges or handle. Frodo approached it with care. The wood was blackened with age, but still solid, and though his lantern's flame wavered with every step, its light revealed symbols along the upper arch, a crescent moon cradling a star, encircled by runes so ancient Frodo could not read them. He set the lantern down carefully and pushed against the frame. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a whisper of sliding stone and the faintest sigh of disturbed air, the door sank slightly inward and swung aside, revealing a passage beyond. Dust billowed up, choking and dry, and Frodo coughed quietly as he stepped through. The corridor beyond was narrower, but straighter, the walls lined with what looked like old torch sconces, though no flame had burned in them for a long, long while. The passage led him downward once more, and he began to notice the difference in the stone here. This was no longer the raw rock of the hill, but worked stone, blocks fitted together with the kind of precision Frodo had seen only in elven halls or dwarven tunnels. The ceiling arched high above his head, and the carvings here were clearer, better preserved. There were figures now, not just symbols. Tall, robed forms with flowing hair, hands raised in gesture, perhaps of welcome or warning. One bore a staff topped with a shining star. Another held what looked like a book or tablet. Between them was carved a great tree, its roots deep and crown reaching wide, stars glittering above its boughs. Frodo stopped before this image and studied it. It stirred something in him, an echo of Lorien's golden woods, or perhaps even a memory deeper still, drawn from the song-like remnants of elvish speech he had once known so well. This place, he thought, had not been touched by Hobbit kind. It was older than the Shire. As he walked farther, the air seemed to change, growing warmer and drier. The scent of earth faded, replaced by the faint aroma of cedar and something faintly sweet, like pressed flowers. The passage widened again into a chamber shaped like a circle, with a domed ceiling painted in delicate blues and silvers. The paint was faded, but the design was unmistakable. A night sky filled with constellations Frodo did not know, and a pale silver moon at its center. The walls were lined with alcoves, most empty, though some still held remnants of things long forgotten, fragments of scrolls, pieces of metalwork, and in one corner the broken half of what looked like an elven harp. In the center of the room stood a pedestal of polished white stone. Upon it rested a wooden chest, bound in silver and carved with vines and blossoms so intricate they seemed almost alive. The lid bore no lock, only a simple elvish inscription burned into the wood. For safekeeping until the time of need, let no hand open this in haste. Frodo felt his breath catch. The chest seemed untouched by dust or decay, as if time had ignored it while aging everything else. He stepped forward slowly, heart pounding with something that was not fear, but awe. What could Bilbo have known of this place? Had he found it and chosen to hide it away, to protect it? Or had he been guided here, as Frodo now felt himself guided, not by chance, but by quiet intention? He reached out and let his fingers rest upon the lid. It was cool, smooth, and somehow comforting. The carvings pulsed gently beneath his hand, as though the chest were aware of his presence. He took a deep breath and, remembering the words on the lid, opened it with slow care, not forcing the wood but allowing it to lift at its own pace. Inside, the chest was lined with deep blue velvet, still rich in color despite the passing of time. Resting within were several items: a rolled scroll tied with a silver cord, a small object wrapped in soft cloth, and an amber-colored crystal the size of a plum, resting in a cradle of carved wood. Frodo reached first for the scroll and untied it carefully. The parchment was old but strong, and the handwriting elegant and fine. He began to read, his eyes scanning the opening lines. It was written in Sindarin, but he understood enough to grasp the meaning. It was a letter, signed by Elrond of Rivendell. The words spoke of a time before the council, of secrets known only to the eldest of the wise. There were references to a hidden relic from the elder days, a fragment of lost knowledge not even Gandalf had known in full. Elrond had hidden this record away, fearing that it might one day fall into hands unprepared for its burden. Frodo's hand trembled slightly as he continued to read. There were names in this letter he did not recognize, places that had vanished beneath shadow, alliances forgotten even by lawmasters. Elrond had written not for a scholar, but for a seeker, someone who, like Frodo, had touched both shadow and light, who could carry the weight of knowing. The letter ended with a quiet warning. If you have found this, it is because your path was meant to cross mine, even beyond time. Guard what lies here, and trust not all tales you were told. Frodo lowered the scroll slowly, the words settling in his heart like stones into deep water. He reached next for the wrapped object and gently unrolled the cloth. Within lay a pendant, silver, set with a stone that shimmered like starlight trapped in ice. He did not know its name, but it felt familiar, as if he had seen it once, in a dream. Last, he looked at the amber crystal. It seemed to hum faintly in his palm, warm to the touch, and as he held it up, light from the lantern passed through it and cast shapes upon the chamber wall. Trees, towers, stars, and a face he did not recognize but would never forget. He had not opened a hidden room. He had opened a memory, a whisper of something long buried and waiting. And in that moment, beneath the hill that had been his home, Frodo felt something stir far older than himself, something watching, something remembering. He replaced the items gently, closed the lid, and sat beside the chest in the silence, wondering not what he had found, but why it had waited for him. Frodo sat in the dim chamber for a long while, listening to the soft hum of silence that now surrounded him. though deep beneath the Shire, he did not feel lost or trapped. Rather, the space felt alive, like it was breathing softly, watching kindly. The lantern's glow shimmered across the stone walls, catching in the faint silver lines of the star-painted dome overhead. Frodo's thoughts lingered on the words in Elrond's letter. There had been a tone to it, not fear, but gravity, as though the knowledge enclosed here was not simply hidden but protected, waiting for someone who could understand its worth beyond power. He glanced again at the chest, now closed, its silver inlay glimmering faintly. The pendant, the scroll, the crystal, these were not treasure in the way dwarves counted such things. They were memory, woven into matter, passed from hand to hand, like song into wind. And now, somehow, they belonged to him. Rising slowly, Frodo retrieved the scroll and gently placed it into the pouch he had brought with him. The crystal and pendant he left for now, sensing that they were meant to remain here until the time for them to travel came. The air shifted softly as he turned toward the entrance passage, almost like a sigh. He stepped back into the hall, lantern held high, and retraced his steps through the narrow corridor lined with ancient sconces. But his eyes now saw what he had missed before, tiny etchings in the base of each torch bracket, lines of elvish verse barely a finger's width tall. He paused at one and read aloud in a soft whisper. "In stillness lies the voice of stars now." The words sent a tingle up his spine. This was not merely a hidden vault. It had been a place of reflection, maybe even refuge, used by someone who understood the deep currents of time and memory, far beyond even Elrond's age. Frodo stepped forward and studied the chair with quiet awe. It was carved from a single block of smooth, pale granite, its arms shaped like flowing water, its back rising in a curling spiral. Upon the seat lay a folded cloth, dark blue and edged with gold thread. Frodo lifted it with reverent hands and discovered a faded sigil sewn into its center, a tree with 7 stars above it and a crown of silver light. He knew it from Elendil's line, yet older than Gondor or Arnor. This was a relic of Númenor, preserved not by time but by intention, protected not just from decay, but from history itself. Someone, perhaps Elrond himself or another of the wise, had brought it here to lie forgotten, until it could be remembered. As he moved deeper back toward the antechamber, Frodo's lantern caught a glint on the floor, a faint thread of silver dust, like a trail. It led off the main corridor, toward what appeared at first to be a simple curve in the wall. But upon closer inspection, Frodo noticed a delicate seam. Setting the lantern beside him, he pressed gently on the stone, and once more, the earth gave way without resistance. A narrow side passage opened, revealing a much smaller chamber beyond, one that felt even older than the others. Inside, the ceiling was lower and domed with gold and copper leaf, much of it flaked and tarnished. In the center was a small fountain basin, dry now, but still faintly aromatic, with herbs and oils long vanished. Around it were several shallow alcoves, carved directly into the walls, each filled with scroll tubes, relics, and one, at the far side, holding a small stone chair. He sat for a moment on the edge of the fountain and looked around. These relics were not meant for power. They were fragments of stories, pieces of legacies too fragile for war, too precious for pride. Frodo felt a strange peace settle into him, as though being here, surrounded by echoes of the first and second ages, allowed him to set down some small part of his burden. He thought of Sam, of Merry and Pippin, of the Shire above, sleeping in its green cradle, never knowing the depth of what lay beneath. That was as it should be. Not every tale needed telling, but still, someone had hoped these memories would be found. That much was clear. He stood again and walked to one of the scroll alcoves. He withdrew a tube and opened it, finding within a faded piece of vellum inked in a flowing hand not unlike that of the scroll in the chest. This one was more personal, a reflection rather than a record. It spoke of a vision, of a meeting beneath stars, of a promise made in the light of Arundel's star. It told of a conversation between Elrond and another whose name was scratched away by time or choice. The words hinted at a secret not of power, but of choice, that the fate of the world, though shaped by great events, was also turned by quiet hearts in quiet places. That courage was not always loud, nor wisdom bound in crowns. Frodo's heart stirred again, as if those lines had been written for him, as though the past had reached forward gently to touch the bruised places in his soul. He rolled the scroll carefully and returned it to its alcove, then stepped back toward the corridor, pausing only once to run his hand along the stone seat, as if to thank whoever had placed these memories here. The way back felt shorter somehow, though no less mysterious. The corridor no longer loomed but welcomed. Frodo passed again the great mural of the tree with stars above it and paused to look once more. The branches seemed to shimmer faintly in the lamplight, as if the stars still watched, even now. He whispered to it, unsure why. "I remember." Whether it was a promise or a prayer, he wasn't certain. As he reached the final turn, before the sliding bookshelf and the warmth of Bag End, Frodo stopped. There was something in him now that would not go away. Not fear, not confusion, but the sense that what he had found could not be unfound. That the letter from Elrond, the pendant, the crystal, all were part of a larger tapestry not yet fully seen. And then he stepped back through the secret panel and into the familiar scent of wood and firelight. The bookshelf clicked softly back into place behind him, as though it had never moved. The study looked unchanged, yet Frodo did not feel the same. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting long golden shadows across the room. Outside the round window, the stars still turned in their ancient dance. He took his seat again in Bilbo's old armchair and pulled a thick quilt around his shoulders. On the table beside him, the book he had left sat open to a page describing the histories of Elendil's line. He closed it gently, set the scroll beside it, and leaned back with a long sigh. The house creaked softly, as if in contentment. Frodo stared into the fire and let the silence surround him. Whatever came next, he knew now that Bag End was more than just home. It was a bridge between ages, a resting place of memory, and perhaps, just perhaps, a beginning once more. Morning in the Shire came gently, with golden beams spilling across green hills and the quiet rustle of leaves touched by breeze. But inside Bag End, Frodo stirred only slowly, still held in the hush of what he had discovered beneath the hill. Though the sun was warm on the round window and birdsong trilled beyond the curtains, his heart remained tethered to stone halls and elvish sigils. He rose, washed and dressed simply, moving as if the house itself were listening. After a modest breakfast, tea, honeyed bread and a slice of cheese, he returned to the study, scroll in hand, and sat once more where the fire had burned low the night before. The embers were cold now, but the memory of warmth lingered. Frodo unrolled Elrond's letter again, letting his eyes trace each line, this time more slowly, with the clarity that daylight often brings. The words carried new weight in morning light, their edges sharper, more deliberate. He paused at one particular phrase. The shard that remembers, lost in amber, kept where silence endures. His fingers drifted to the amber crystal he had left in the chamber below. It had pulsed with a soft heat when he held it. Not merely an object, but something alive. Not in breath or thought, but in memory. Frodo felt sure now that the crystal contained something more than light, a vision perhaps, or a story locked in time. Elrond had spoken of a relic of sight, not power, meant not to influence but to reveal. What might it show him if he looked deeper? And then there was the pendant, its star-like stone shimmering like the phial of Galadriel, but cooler, quieter. He wondered if it had belonged to someone, an elf lord, or perhaps Elrond himself. The notion stirred both awe and unease. To carry a piece of someone else's story was no small thing. It demanded care and choice. Frodo stood, the scroll still in hand, and paced the room, the way Bilbo used to when wrestling with difficult verses. He was thinking not only of what he had found, but of what he should do with it. The chamber below had been sealed with intention, and the artifacts preserved with reverence. They were not hidden to be forgotten, but protected, waiting. That much he believed now with certainty. Yet to whom should he speak of them? Sam, ever loyal, would listen and follow if asked. But Frodo hesitated to place such a burden upon him. And Gandalf, he was gone beyond the circles of the world, beyond even the reach of the elves now sailing westward. Frodo suddenly missed him deeply, more than he had in many months. The wizard had always known what to do with strange relics and deep truths. He would have smiled, perhaps with a twinkle in his eye, and said, "Ah, Frodo, my boy, some things are best found by those who are not seeking." Days passed, and the world above carried on as usual. Sam came by once with a basket of late summer apples and a cheerful laugh, though Frodo sensed he noticed something different in the air. "You look well, Mr. Frodo," he said, "but like you're walking through a dream these days." Frodo smiled, hugged him, and said only, "I've been remembering, Sam, that's all." Sam nodded, not pressing, content with the truth he knew was enough for now. And still, each night, Frodo returned below the study to sit by the chest and read the other scrolls preserved in the hidden alcoves. They spoke of languages lost, of places now sunken beneath forest or sea. One scroll even detailed the crafting of the amber crystal, known as Silmathar, the memory flame, said to have been created by a healer of Lorien to preserve the last song of a fading soul. That evening, as twilight stretched long and blue across the fields, Frodo did something he had not done since before the quest. He lit a candle, opened his old leather-bound journal, and began to write. Not of the ring or the wall, not of Mordor or Gollum, but of the passage beneath Bag End, of the silver chest and the pendant, and of Elrond's letter and the words it carried across time. His hand trembled as he wrote the name, Elrond Peridel, and beside it, a thought that had nestled quietly in his mind since he first read the letter, that there was more to the Elf Lord than Laura had told. A secret, yes, but not of shame, of legacy and love. He wrote of the mention of a meeting beneath the stars, of a promise made in secret, and of the pendant, possibly a token of that bond. The story was unfolding, not in battlefields or high councils, but in whispers, gentle, reverent, hidden. At last, after nearly a week of silent communion with the chamber, Frodo could no longer resist. One still evening, when the sky was soft with starlight, he took the amber crystal and pendant from the chest and sat beneath the painted dome. He placed the crystal on the stone pedestal and touched it with the pendant, just as one of the scrolls had instructed. The moment the star-shaped stone met the amber, a light flared, not harsh, but gentle, like moonlight upon still water. The room dimmed, and from the heart of the crystal rose a vision, shaped in light and shadow. Frodo sat still, breath shallow, as images unfolded before him. A glade bathed in silver light, two figures standing beneath an ancient tree. One was Elrond, young yet burdened, his eyes full of memory. The other, cloaked and radiant, an elf maid, whose face was at once unfamiliar and deeply stirring. They spoke not in words, but in song, a melody of sorrow and hope, of parting and promise. The vision shifted, Elrond placing the pendant into the chest, sealing it with a blessing. His voice echoed faintly. Let this memory pass not into shadow, but into trust, to be known when the world can bear it. And then the light faded. Frodo remained still for a long time, the silence as full as the vision had been. He felt the weight of what he had seen, not sorrow, but a tenderness so vast it left him quiet. This had been Elrond's secret, a memory not of war or strategy, but of love quietly held, never forgotten. The pendant had not been a talisman of power. It was a token of remembrance given in farewell. And now it was entrusted to Frodo, not to wield but to guard, to witness. He rose slowly, returned the pendant and crystal to their place, and touched the chest once more. I will remember, he whispered, and I will keep it safe. The chamber's hush seemed to affirm the vow, not in sound, but in peace. As he climbed back into Bag End, the night wrapped itself around the hills, and stars shimmered above like blessings from long ago. Frodo stood at the round window and looked out, heart full, not with burden, but with purpose. This was not the end of a tale, nor the beginning. It was a continuation, a gentle turning of the page, in a story older than any Hobbit had ever known. Autumn arrived in the Shire with a hush of gold, like a painter brushing every tree and hill with quiet flame. The air grew cooler, touched by distant frost that had not yet settled, and the smell of turned earth drifted on every breeze. In Bag End, Frodo spent his days, much as he had in summer, walking gently among the paths behind the hill, sipping warm tea by the fire. But the rhythm of his thoughts had changed. Where before he'd felt the slow weight of memory, he now felt something lighter, but no less potent. Purpose. Not the kind that rushed with urgency, but the kind that lingered like a promise in the bones of the earth. The vision from the crystal had stayed with him, not like a dream, but like a new truth placed beside the old ones. A memory not his own, yet entrusted to him. He had begun to think of Elrond differently now, not only as the great elf lord of Rivendell, nor simply as the wise counselor who once sat at the Council of the Ring, but as a man of sorrow and depth, whose heart had carried a silence deeper than many would guess. Frodo wondered often about the elf maid in the vision. Her name had never been spoken aloud, not even in the song he had heard. Yet the sadness in their farewell was unmistakable. And there had been love there, patient and undemanding, like the stars above the sea. Was she among those who sailed west? Or had she, like so many others of the elder days, vanished into legend? Frodo didn't know, and perhaps he never would. But what he did know, what he was certain of, was that Elrond had wanted that memory preserved, and not for himself. The days grew shorter, and Frodo began to write again, more steadily. His journal thickened with ink and thought, page after page of careful script. He wrote not only of the hidden chamber and its treasures, but of the ideas the relics stirred in him, of silence as strength, of remembrance as healing. These were not lessons the war had taught him, but gifts that had come after. One afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the round windows and smoke curled gently from the hearth, he took up a fresh sheet and began to write a letter. Not to anyone he could send it to, but as a kind of offering to the past. It began simply, "To Elrond half-elven, in whose silence I have found peace." And from there, the words poured gently, telling of the chamber beneath the hill, of the pendant and crystal, and of the vision that now lived in Frodo's heart. He thanked Elrond, not only for his wisdom, but for his trust. That night, Frodo dreamed of Rivendell, but it was not the house as he had last seen it. In the dream, it was aglow with starlight and laughter, and voices rose in songs he did not know but somehow understood. He saw a great tree, its branches reaching into the sky, and beneath it sat Elrond, not grave but smiling faintly, listening as the wind carried some memory across the valley. Frodo stood at a distance, but the elf lord turned and met his gaze, and in that silent moment, Frodo felt a warmth that eased something long held tight within him. When he awoke, he sat for a time, wrapped in his blanket, watching the fading stars through the window. The world felt quiet, but not empty. In the days that followed, Frodo returned to the chamber less often. Not from fear, but from understanding. The place below Bag End had given him what it was meant to. It was not a treasure trove to be hoarded or studied endlessly. It was a resting place for a part of the past that had needed someone to carry it forward. Gently, respectfully. He still kept the pendant with him, tucked carefully in a small velvet pouch, and sometimes in the evening he would hold it in his palm, feeling its cool weight and remembering the song without words that had filled the chamber when the vision rose. The crystal remained in its place, dim now, resting. It had spoken once, and that was enough. The first frost came early that year. Frodo stood at the edge of the garden one morning, breath misting the air, and watched a robin hop along the stone wall. He smiled, thinking how unchanged some things remained. Sam had come the day before with Rosie and little Eleanor, and they had laughed together over warm cider and tales of the garden's stubborn late beans. Frodo had not told Sam of the chamber. Not yet. He had written it down, though, and left the pages in a small carved box beneath his writing desk. Perhaps one day Sam, or someone else, would read them, but not while the world was still so full of living. One evening, as the wind whispered across the hills and the moon rose full and serene, Frodo stood once more before the bookshelf. He ran his hand along its worn spines, remembering the click of the hidden latch, the soft scrape of stone sliding aside. But he did not open it. Instead, he laid a hand gently against the wood and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, not to the room, not even to Elrond, but to the story itself, for choosing him to bear it, for healing something in him he hadn't known was still broken. Then he stepped back, turned and walked into the firelight, the pendant resting softly against his heart. He did not know what lay ahead. The sea still called him in quiet moments, as it always had since he left Mordor. But now, the call did not ache. It felt like a friend's voice from afar, waiting, not demanding. He might go, he might stay. He might tell the story one day, or he might let it sleep, as the chamber had for so long. All choices were still open. For now, he poured a cup of tea, opened a favorite book of Bilbo's riddles, and settled into his chair, the fire crackling softly at his feet. The stars turned slowly above the hill, and within Bag End, peace lingered like autumn's breath. The wind that came in early November was not the same wind that had danced among the summer trees or rustled the golden leaves of October. It was sharper, edged with a whisper that carried farther than sound should travel. And Frodo felt it first one evening as he sat near the fireplace, the pendant lying quietly on the table beside his journal. A sudden draft passed through the room, though no window was open. It was not cold in the usual way. Rather, it brought a stillness that reminded him of the moments before thunder, a hush full of waiting. He looked toward the bookshelf, the place where the hidden passage lay, and felt something stir inside him. Not fear exactly, not even dread, but a knowing. The memory preserved beneath the hill was not only a tale of sorrow and beauty, it had left an echo behind. And now, something was listening. For this afterward, Frodo tried to convince himself it was nothing more than the natural turning of the season. The Shire was full of subtle noises in the colder months, shifting earth, nesting animals, even the groans of old trees against rising wind. But deep within, he knew this was different. One night, as he wrote by lamplight, the flame flickered in a way that made him pause. It danced sideways, not toward any window or door, but toward the bookshelf. Then it stilled, as if deciding not to speak. Frodo laid down his pen and stood, moving with deliberate calm to the hidden passage. He touched the old notch, pressed gently, and the stone slid back with its usual quiet. But when he stepped inside, he felt the change immediately. The air was heavy, not with dust or dampness, but with memory stirred away. The chamber remained as he had left it, crystal dormant, scrolls undisturbed, the pendant's resting place smooth and cool. Yet something had passed through, something unseen but not without intent. Frodo moved carefully, lighting a single candle and placing it near the pedestal. As the flame rose, he reached for the amber crystal. It felt colder than before and heavier, though its size had not changed. He brought it close to his chest and sat beneath the dome where the mural shimmered faintly. He whispered the words of the elvish blessing written on the edge of the scroll he had read weeks before, the one describing how the Silmathar could awaken again, but only if called by truth, not desire. The stone bore a scene, almost invisible except under the candle's shifting light. He pressed against it, gently at first, then with firmer hands. There was a soft resistance, then a sound like a sigh, and the wall gave way. A narrow passage opened behind it, cloaked in shadow and silence. The air that greeted him was colder still, but clean, untouched by rot or time. He took a deep breath, lit another candle, and stepped inside. The corridor wound gently downward, not steep, but deliberate. The walls were smooth, not roughly hewn like the first chamber, and lined with faint traces of silver and blue, like veins of forgotten starlight. Frodo felt as if he were descending into a memory deeper than Elrond's, a memory of something ancient, perhaps even older than Rivendell itself. The crystal warmed slowly in his hands, and the mural above seemed to shift with the movement of flame. But no vision came. No light rose. Instead, he heard a sound, very faint, like a breath drawn through ancient stone. And with it came a feeling, deep and undeniable. The story was not over. Elrond's memory had been preserved, but not all of it. There was something else, something not locked in the crystal or pendant, but hidden elsewhere, perhaps deeper. Frodo stood, heart steady despite the chill rising through the soles of his feet. He placed the crystal back on the pedestal and knelt beside the far wall, where the elvish script marked the border of the chamber. He had not explored beyond that edge, assuming it was merely decorative. But now he traced the runes more closely and found a break in the pattern. At the end of the corridor, he entered a small circular room, far simpler than the one above. In the center stood a stone table, and upon it a single object, a book. Its cover was worn, but the leather still held traces of gold leaf, and its clasp was shaped like a leaf from Lorien. Frodo touched it reverently, then opened the cover. The pages were written in Elvish, but the script was softer, more intimate than any he had seen. It was a journal, Elrond's, and as he read, Frodo realized this was no record of court or council. These were personal thoughts, moments spoken to no one, saved in quiet loneliness. The entries are neat. Eteris told of a meeting long before the last alliance, before even Rivendell was founded, of an elf maid who had wandered from the Grey Havens, seeking silence and healing after great loss, of evenings beneath trees where words were not needed, of a bond that grew not out of fire but out of shared stillness. They had known their paths would part, Elrond wrote, but still they gave one another memory, a song, a pendant, and a promise that their story would not vanish like so many others. I have placed it beneath the hill, Elrond wrote in the final entry, for one who carries pain not unlike my own. Let him find it when he is ready, and let him know that even in sorrow there is beauty that endures. Frodo closed the book, hands trembling slightly. He sat beside the stone table and wept, not with grief, but with a deep, wordless gratitude, for being trusted, for being healed, for being, in some small way, a part of a story that had nothing to do with darkness or power, but everything to do with quiet love and memory. When at last he rose, he carried the journal with him not to keep, but to preserve, to place among his writings, wrapped carefully, waiting for another who might need it one day. As he climbed the winding path back to Bag End, the wind outside had calmed, but the stars above shone with rare clarity. He stepped out into the cold night, breathing deeply of the air, and looked to the west. The sea still called, but now it was not a beckoning escape. It was a welcome, a homecoming, a final page, yet unwritten, but waiting in peace. Winter came to the Shire quietly that year, not with sudden snows or biting wind. but with a stillness that crept gently into the bones of the land. Frost covered the gardens of Hobbiton each morning like a soft silver lace, and the chimneys of Bag End puffed their white breath into skies pale with waiting. Frodo spent more time by the fire, his hands often curled around a warm mug of tea, and his thoughts moved like the river, sometimes slow and deep, sometimes bright and quick, always flowing towards something unseen. The book he had found in the second chamber lay now in a velvet-wrapped box beneath his writing desk, safe among his own writings. He had not opened it again, not because he feared what it might say, but because he felt its words had already passed into him. Some stories, once read with the heart, do not need repeating aloud. He wrote less now, not because he had no more to say, but because he no longer felt the weight of needing to say everything. His pages bore only what mattered: small truths, quiet beauty, and memory, not as burden, but as offering. He sometimes walked to the crest of the hill above Bag End, where the view stretched west beyond the water, and there he would sit for hours listening to the wind. The pendant never left his side. It rested in his pocket like a smooth whisper, warm some days, cool on others. Often, in the hush of evening, he would cup it in his palm and feel the soft pulse within it. Not a heartbeat, but something older. It no longer gave visions, but it still carried presence, like a song long since ended, whose melody lived on in the hush of silence after the last note. Sam came often, bringing little Eleanor with him, her golden curls bouncing as she ran through the house, filling it with laughter and light. Frodo loved her presence, not only for the joy she brought, but because she reminded him of what had been saved. He watched Sam watching his daughter, and in those moments he saw the reason why all their burdens had been borne, why darkness had been challenged. It was not for grand tales or eternal glory. It was for the chance that a child might grow up in peace, barefoot on soft grass beneath a sky free of shadow. Frodo never spoke of the chamber to Sam, not even now though he considered it. But he trusted that one day, when the time was right, someone would find what had been hidden. For now, the secret was his to keep, as it had been Elrond's before him. One twilight, a letter came from the Grey Havens. Círdan had written in fine, sea-worn script. The white ship would soon sail again. Frodo read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it by the hearth. He did not decide that day, but something in him had already begun to stir. That night, he dreamed of a shore he had never seen, but always known. In his dream, he walked not alone, but with someone beside him. Not Sam, nor Bilbo, nor Gandalf. A woman with quiet eyes and silver-threaded hair, the elf maid from the vision. She did not speak, but offered him her hand, and together they stepped onto the water as if it were land. When he awoke, he wept, not in sadness, but in longing, a soft ache, like the echo of a beloved song heard again from a great distance. The next day, he walked the hill paths slowly, visiting places he had always known, the party tree, the stone bench overlooking the water, the little hollow behind the garden where mushrooms sometimes grew, even in frost. He touched each place gently, as if saying farewell, though he said no words aloud. At Bag End, he packed a small bag, not with haste, but with care. His journal, the pendant, the wrapped book, and a few other things. A handkerchief Sam had embroidered, a pipe of Bilbo's, and a stone from the garden that he had picked up on the day he returned from Mordor. These things were not necessary for the journey across the sea, but they were part of the story he carried, and he wished to bring them with him. Sam came that evening. Frodo made tea, and they sat in silence for a time. Then Frodo told him about the letter, about the decision he had made, about the core that had become peace. Sam's eyes filled with quiet sorrow, but he did not try to change Frodo's mind. He only reached across the table and took his hand. "I always knew you'd go," he said softly. "Not because you had to, but because you were meant to." Frodo smiled. "It's not a leaving, Sam," he said. "It's a returning." They sat long into the night, and when Sam rose to go, he hugged Frodo tighter than ever before. "You'll be in every part of the Shire," Sam said. "Wherever there's peace, you'll be there." Frodo nodded. He could feel it too. The day of departure dawned with soft light and mist curling through the hills. Frodo dressed simply and stepped from Bag End without ceremony. No crowd gathered, no horns blew. Only Sam, Merry, and Pippin waited for him at the edge of the lane, their faces full of love and longing. Eleanor stood beside her father, holding a small posy of wildflowers. Frodo knelt and took them gently. "Thank you, my dear," Ba said there. "They'll remind me of green things wherever I go." She smiled and tucked a blossom into the buttonhole of his coat. Then he embraced them all one by one and walked with Sam to the wagon. They rode together in silence toward the havens. At the grey havens, the sea greeted him, not with roar, but with lullaby. The ship stood waiting, its white sails catching wind that smelled of salt and memory. Gandalf stood aboard, his face as warm and kind as ever. Bilbo was already resting within, older now, quieter, but smiling as Frodo climbed the gangplank. "Took you long enough," Bilbo murmured. Frodo laughed gently. "I had a few things to write." As the ship pulled away, he stood at the stern, watching the white shore fade. Sam stood there, unmoving, until the last glimmer of sail vanished, and then Frodo turned to face the west. The pendant lay against his chest, warm as the rising sun. In his heart, the vision lived still, the sea, the song, the memory, and he knew now that healing was not forgetting. It was remembering with gentleness, with grace, with love. As the shores of Middle-earth slipped away behind them, Frodo breathed deep, and for the first time in many years, the weight upon his shoulders was gone. Ahead lay a land he had never seen, but it was not strange. It was home. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with me here at the Cozy Storytime. As Frodo's journey beneath Bag End comes to a close, and the last sail vanishes beyond the horizon, may your heart feel a little lighter, your breath a little slower, and your thoughts a little softer. This story, tucked gently between the pages of Middle-earth, reminds us that healing doesn't always come with grand battles or bright trumpets. It often arrives in silence, in memory, and in the kindness we carry forward. Tonight, may you carry with you that same peace. Let the stillness of the Shire settle into your chest, like mist curling over grassy hills at dawn. You've wandered through tunnels of forgotten light, uncovered secrets beneath ancient stone, and now, like Frodo, you are ready to rest. There's no need to hold on to the day any longer. Whatever weight you've carried, let it drift like a white sail on a western breeze. You are safe now, and the world can wait until morning. Let your thoughts fall like soft leaves. and give yourself permission to simply be still. If you're already drifting towards sleep, stay there. Let your dreams carry you gently onward, past the woods and rivers of your own imagination. And if you're still awake, know that another cozy story waits for you whenever you return. Please subscribe, like, and share this moment of calm with someone who might need it too. But for now, rest easy. May your night be deep, warm, and filled with peace. Good night, dear listener. You are not alone.